I just want to welcome everybody, and we're very excited that you could join us tonight to talk about artificial intelligence and the impact it has on the future of healthcare. I'm Emily Allen with Smashing Boxes. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight. A couple of things here. I'm going to start off with a couple questions for our panel. They'll quickly introduce themselves, but our goal for tonight is to really make this more of a conversation, a dialogue between everybody. So I encourage you to ask other questions that you may have. If you know something that we don't, please feel free to share. This is, for the betterment and advancement of our understanding of AI and where it can go. So, dream big, speak big. Champagne if you need a little liquid courage. But this is HealthTech2027. So, panel, would you all just briefly introduce yourselves, why you're here?
Sure.
Not because I paid you. I did it.
So my name is Kevin McAbee, and I do wear a lot of hats here at Smashing Boxes, but I'm also a solutions architect. I've got 20 years of experience in both business development and sales, but also in heavy programming, development, architecture, and everything else from multiple startups, large international organizations, including SaaS, and a variety of other places. I've worked on everything from distributed computing with natural language analytics to web applications to mobile applications, and also do some device work and so on and so forth. And so what I try to do here is find how you can pair business value and improve business value, bottom line, help healthcare, help everything that we can to make people's lives better through the use of technology.
I'm Nick Jordan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Smashing Boxes. I've been an entrepreneur for, 10 years now, 7 of which are with Smashing Boxes. The other 3 were not that successful at all. We wanted to get this going because we think our market, our area is uniquely positioned to be a leader in healthcare and technology. Especially as we see some of these next generation platforms mature. So thank you for coming. This is like the first of many events, and we wanted to just kick it off with a panel and a conversation. But by all means, let's make this a dialogue and let's see what we can do.
And I'm John O'Donnell. I worked at Smashing Boxes earlier this year for about a year. I went to Duke Medical School, graduated in 2015, did 1 year of residency in internal medicine. But left thinking I wanted to make a more system-level change. I'm now back at Duke working in orthopedics, working on new care delivery models and payment models for arthritis. I'm thrilled to be here, and ditto the sentiment here that we want this to be a conversation. I don't think anyone is truly an AI expert, probably not in this room especially. So to be able to dialogue with you all and learn together is my hope.
Awesome. Wait, do we have any AI experts? Get up here, Brooks. you're on the panel.
Am I really? Ready to bench?
All right. So while Brooks is actually, you can give a little bit about yourself.
Okay.
Do you mind?
I don't mind. It's right here. Is that right?
No?
Hi, everybody. I'm Brooks Adcock. I work for a company called Dude Solutions. I am apparently an AI expert. I have a background in emergency medicine, brain-computer interfaces, a little bit of special effects, worked for Google X. Now I solve problems around how do we use data, AI, to predict how we can make the physical assets, the dumb assets around us, better, last longer, cost less, so we can allocate resources to where they are maybe more valuable. Current project.
Anybody else? Because we will put you up here. All right. So the first question I'm going to point towards Nick. What are the trends, funding, and activity that you see within AI right now, and where do you see them going? Just to give us a little background.
Sweet. So I wrote some stats down. This is compiled via a combination of Crunchbase, a venture survey site, and HIMSS. And the trend is it's going up. So there were 160 deals in AI in 2012, 658 in 2016. $589 million in VC money raised in 2012, $5 billion in 2016, so almost 10x that. Of the 160 in 2012, 20 of them were in healthcare, and then in 2016, 70 were AI deals in healthcare, so more than 10% of the AI market is focusing on healthcare. The HIM study that I was referencing said 4% of hospitals now incorporate AI into their facility or their practice. 35% intend to incorporate the AI in 2 years, and 50% intend to incorporate it within 5 years. So what that says, it's a growing ecosystem. There's an expanding pie of money. There's an expanding amount of entrepreneurs pursuing business and making it better, and an expanding market as more hospitals look to embrace and adopt it. I see a question.
Any idea how much the big IT guys, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, and Google are putting into AI right now?
Yeah, no, I don't know exactly, but when they, well, when you just start to like do some desktop research, I might just pulled that together in a matter of like 15 to 20 minutes because I already knew the answer. It's growing, the trend is up and to the right, but a lot of big funds are being spun off by not just traditional tech companies, but more of like physical space companies, so device manufacturers, large equipment makers who might sell into. GE actually has a big fund, so I think they have a fund that has $300 million to go out and plant around. So I'm not sure how much of the funding activity of deals closed were from their funds and companies like that, but I know they're putting a lot of money into the ecosystem. Great question.
And something to kind of go along with what you're asking there in terms of the money, when you take a look at the scope of deals such as IBM with Watson and MD Anderson, that was around a $30 million deal. That was just one. You also have to start thinking about what is the definition of artificial intelligence and machine learning, so on and so forth. The idea behind artificial intelligence is that you are training a computer to do something that has historically required human cognition. So if you were to take that as the definition, Google and Tesla are hardcore into artificial intelligence, even though Elon Musk is afraid they're all going to kill us, because they have to do image recognition processing just like a human would for all of the self-driving cars. And because of the money that goes into things like processing and understanding those images and analyzing them, that immediately has application. When you're doing CT scans, CAT scans, radiology, and anything else in medical, that's where the money goes, is to be able to help make those things and definitions and recommendations quicker. So it's starting out already. You're looking at billions upon billions of dollars, and it's only, as Nick was saying, going to go up into tens to hundreds of billions of dollars going forward as we amass all this data and try to find out how can it make our lives better.
Yeah, and we're seeing proliferation of AI investment into areas that are perhaps a little bit lateral to the mainstream AI as well. Like NVIDIA is making huge investment. If you look at how much it takes to develop, like physical hardware and chips, NVIDIA is actually starting to create their own server blades and things like that in order to be able to do the kind of heavy lifting that AI requires. And so we're seeing this lateral proliferation into all kinds of areas, and I think we're going to see that trend of proliferation continue. So,
much of a role in, this is great trends that we see in AI, right? But in healthcare, you always have the regulations that can be applied to this trend. While there's a steep uptick in other areas, how do you project this AI going into mainstream in healthcare because of regulation? Should we be involved sort of in that area too?
So when you're dealing with a lot of regulation and you get into HIPAA compliance, you start getting around the concepts of PHI and PII, basically information that can identify patients. Once you start crossing that threshold is when you get into all the regulations and complications and everything else. Now, if you are able to take and separate out somebody's historical information from their identifying information, then you can end up making recommendations that aren't necessarily going to fall under that HIPAA compliance because there's no way to tie it to an individual. When you do end up having to tie it in with something like HIPAA compliance and dealing with the regulations, that's when you're going to be looking at that contact point between all of the recommendations that have come from these engines that have studied and they've processed tens of millions of records to be able to make recommendations. They now go through and process somebody's current medical records without knowing anything about that individual. You're okay. when you have to then take those recommendations and then combine it with somebody's identifying information is where you're definitely going to hit some pain points. Now, having said that, there's always going to be, exceptions and stuff to the rule that makes it fall under regulation, but that's a way to kind of help keep that separation there, is keep all identifying information over here and then everything else that you're doing to build out and make recommendations and such over here.
Let me just add that we're totally into de-identifying information analytic, but one of the biggest things I think we'd like to do with, as a community with identified information is use geographic information to help us with artificial intelligence systems that can make decisions about healthcare based on where you live. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of wonderful things we could do there. That's identifying information. And so I think it's going to be a tough spot for us to try to leverage geographic information about people in our AI systems in healthcare.
Absolutely.
It would be a great thing to do. It crosses that border immediately. So.
And as you start getting into, as this gentleman was saying, geographic information and utilizing that, it takes, I'm sorry, I saw your hand up back there, and I'll continue in a second. What was your?
And I'll let you finish.
No, please.
I want to get into the segregation of building the model versus running the model, and I think that helps with HIPAA compliance.
Yeah, whenever you have the model of information and your programs model, your architecture, your algorithms, that entire flow of information from beginning to end through your system, you can run that against a variety of cases and models and everything else that would say, here's somebody that's going to test positive, negative, in between, and then be able to check and do all of your tests against it. But again, as this gentleman here was saying, once you hit the real world, that's where you're really going to start hitting some of those complications. And if you're a business that's going to do that to where either your product or your SaaS platform and everything else is going to also host and bring in that personally identifying information or the PHI, then I highly suggest you hire a full-time lawyer and you have a couple of, I'm being serious, full-time lawyer, and you hire a couple of dedicated sysadmins who have the clearance, and they're the only people who ever touches or sees any of that data, and then you go through training with your company.
I think that's spot on. I would add to that the fact that the AI is aggregating the data provides a level of anonymity that, in the case of some contracts that I've already seen, allows the value of that data to come down to an individual that it would not otherwise really be allowed to do. So AI is in many respects not a barrier to this, it is actually the answer to how do we take the group data, aggregate it in an anonymous fashion, and then provide individual insights out of it.
We had 2 comments.
I'll just add, this is a very nuanced subject, as you've acknowledged. The de-identification is notoriously tricky. We've had problems of the 7-foot-tall man in town of 10,000 that by knowing about the 7-foot-tall, everybody knows them in their town. So it's not de-identified if that particular vital statistic is available. But I will say that I wouldn't even be afraid of HIPAA generally. I mean, there's certainly the advice about hiring a lawyer and making sure that you're not tripping over any regulations. There are plenty of analytics companies out there that do take on identified information on tens of millions of individuals. It just has to be done under an appropriate business associate agreement with the appropriate privacy.
Exactly.
Not something to be afraid of.
I'm going to put you on the spot, if that's okay. Could you give us some of your background or where you work and kind of your why you came to this conclusion? And I totally agree with it.
Sure. So my background, I was the chief architect of a company called Axolotl, which was the largest health information exchange vendor in the nation. We had identified information on about 40 million individuals. I worked for United Healthcare. I worked for a number of companies that do this at scale. So.
And exactly as this gentleman here was saying, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's just if you're going to take and build software devices or something else and you are going to work with PI or PHI, you need to understand there's going to be additional costs of needing to have properly secured systems way beyond what people are mostly dealing with, having a lawyer on staff, having a variety of other people on staff to be able to take and make sure that you are compliant.
I agree with you 100%. The HIPAA compliance I don't think is the hard part of regulatory. I think when we talk about AI, in my experience, the FDA is going to be the hard part. And so my background is actually very simplistic versions of this from 5, 10 years ago, where we're looking at images of the heart and making decisions. And these were FDA, compliant devices. And to get it through regulatory was pretty much impossible. So I think, I'm curious if you guys have any experience or know of any of the big shots that do have experience getting actual clinical decisions made using AI and machine learning, and where the FDA stands today, or thinking about 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because that's HIPAA's going to be easy, FDA's going to be really hard.
So
I can pitch in a little bit here. I used to work for a CRO in Chapel Hill, and we kind of came very early on, about 5 years ago is when I worked for them, coming across the same thing. It wasn't so much HIPAA compliance. It was working with the FDA, whether it's a medical device, et cetera, drugs. Mind you, I worked on the business development side, so very high level. And I kind of mirror your sentiments on how do you submit, let's say, your NDA or IND to the FDA where it can be approved. And I don't know of a way yet, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's something to be talked about. I think what I have seen as far as trends is FDA is loosening up a little bit because of the trends. So as long as we keep pushing forward with the intelligence, it's forcing the FDA to kind of reconcile this is where it's going. So I'd like to see it kind of loosen up a little bit.
It's another area where there's a big difference between making a clinical decision and advising a clinician.
yes,
I was going to say the same thing.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
there are companies around Forecast Health here in Durham, makes all kinds of predictive models, machine learning inspired models for readmission risk and disease progression risk and things like that. They're very much in the clear because they're informing analytics, they're informing broad population health, they're informing clinicians, but they're not making decisions.
And there is a government organization that was formed, I believe, 2 years ago to start looking at artificial intelligence, regulations around that, especially in its implementation with healthcare. But as you were saying, one of the big things with AI, unlike what you're seeing in law offices where they're actually trying to replace lawyers with AI, in medical, it's not to replace, it's to supplement and help and refine. But at the end, it's always a human who's making the decision.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And so I think the problem you're describing, I don't have any background in that in healthcare per se, but in a broader business context, that exact problem comes up, is who's ultimately making a decision here, and how is the decision sanity checked? And that's a huge concern that's brought up just prolifically with AI. And the answer to it is exactly as was described, that AI should never be in a position, if you're designing an AI product of any sort, it should never be in a position where it's ultimately responsible, because very much like a human, it can occasionally go off the rails. So it should always be in an advisory capacity, so that you really have a closed loop where then there's a critical closed loop in AI between humans and AI. And that is that the AI is informing the human, and then the human's acceptance or rejection of that advice is in turn informing the AI, which then learns and then informs humans better. So that closed loop has to exist in order to be successful.
So where I see the FDA coming in is all these algorithms that are going to be applied and submitted to platforms. I think, in like I'm speaking from a medical imaging standpoint, there'll be thousands upon thousands of algorithms, and at what point do you trust the algorithm to help assist with that diagnosis? So if I'm a radiologist and I'm making a determination based on the help from this, that I trusted this algorithm that was submitted to me, and find out 6 months later it was wrong, at what point, who's held responsible?
So you start getting into what is going to be the purpose behind the AI in the system. A doctor who's looking at some scans, and if they're looking for things that are tumors or cancers or what have you, when it's obvious, they're going to see that and they're going to note it and pull it out. Where AI is really going to benefit is, what about catching it sooner, where according to that scan and some of the other medical information, there's a higher probability that this person is in the beginning stage of forming cancer. And then the AI can come in and say, as it's going and reviewing this individual's information, and again, think of AI as a savant who is highly specialized in one particular thing, and in their mind is contained the medical records, knowledge, and ability to have processed like 25 million or plus things to be able to have these recommendations. So then it can take a look at that scan and combined with the other such say, there's a high probability based on just a slight irregularity that a doctor could catch, but maybe not, especially if they're tired and been doing a lot of work. That AI would then say, there's a high probability that this is cancerous and that we need to do further investigation and exploration. But again, it's not stating it is, and the doctor is not accepting it. And again, in terms of acceptance of AI making decisions, you're going to be looking at not regulation, but societal change. It's dealing with the same thing with autonomous cars. We're slowly making our way to where cars are going to be able to drive themselves more and more, but that's going to require an overall societal change that will then lead to regulations. Either that or whenever the first person suffers negatively, and this could be the same thing with AI, then you'll immediately see regulations. But yeah, does that answer your question?
I mean, I think you have to study it rigorously. You have to put it in a controlled environment with certain physician stopgaps or whatever. I keep thinking of EKG machines right now, which for decades have been spitting out diagnoses that doctors often take blindly and don't actually review the tracings of an EKG. And that's been, well studied and it's used everywhere. And that's a very common, simple example of AI being used successfully and reliably.
That's profound, actually. If you think about it, I didn't think about that. But in EKGs, if you're not familiar, the raw data that comes in is incredibly noisy. It's actually almost indistinguishable from just like raw noise. And EKGs go through actually a profound amount of filtering, and the ones that are very clear actually do adaptive filtering. So like the Medtronic devices. And so there's already precedent in the marketplace for adaptive decision making, and we see it in EKG and other things.
And Harvard Medical School, along with it's a couple of ex-employees maybe from Google or what have you, they have done a lot of research that was saying you could take and say, here's the human error rate in terms of diagnosing or what have you, and then the AI error rate, which right now is still a little bit higher than the human error rate. But then when you combine the two together to review a case, the error rate drops significantly. So again, it's working together, it's adapting and it's refining, it's not taking over or replacing.
Gentleman in the back.
I was just curious, are there 2 or 3 specific examples of where AI is being used currently? Is it routine use or used in the medical field?
The question, in case people over here didn't hear, was, are there 3 cases where AI is currently being used to diagnose, you said, or in healthcare currently?
Healthcare in general, right. So, I mean, hearing about the potential use of AI, but are there any current, use cases that are being implemented successfully, and and then in the near future, what do you see as some good use cases?
Okay. I saw your hand go up. Did you take it back?
No, it's not exactly what we're talking about here. But there's a physician at Duke who's an oncologist who uses immersion virtual reality with patients who are getting chemotherapy to help minimize being scared, fatigue, that type of thing. And that's being implemented there now.
There is adaptive filtering.
EKGs.
In the broader market, you have a Facebook account. Your Facebook account is not everything that everyone posts, it's an AI curated list of those things based on what it believes you to be interested in. So that's, all the best AIs, incidentally, are ones you don't even know are there. That's one of the, I would say, 3 success criteria of AI. And then one thing that's currently in the market that is absolutely and unequivocally, inexorably AI dependent is advanced prostheses, and in particular brain-computer interface prostheses. Because everyone's neural patterns are different, yours are different from mine, from literally everyone in this room, you cannot algorithmically determine the precursors to a motor movement. You have to do that with AI. So all of those currently are using that.
Medical images is another big one. I mean, they've got as good kind of human level recognition. Lung cancer, various cancers, tumors.
So when I was using that example earlier about trying to find cancer or such sooner, that's exactly what's taking place, is going through all of these different scans and being able to parse out either patterned irregularities or something else. So you have that, and then another big one that we can talk about, I'm sure you've all heard of, is preventative medicine. So trying to find out before somebody is sick, before they have to go to the hospital, so you can imagine insurance companies are all about this. What can you do to improve somebody's health so that they don't have to go there in the first place, or once they've gone through surgery, continue monitoring, reviewing their records and everything else to make recommendations post-operation.
So is this currently in use and
The image one is growing. The image scanning and recommendations is there. It is growing, and it's getting refined all the time. The predictive one and post-ops one, there are a variety of startups, and there are large organizations that are getting into that.
There are some pretty large health systems out there recently.
Yeah.
Intermountain Healthcare is a pretty well-known example. If you show up in an Intermountain emergency room, there are agents running in the background that look for things like undiagnosed pneumonia, things like that, and many of them at this point are machine learning. So, yeah, it's very new. It's out there.
We do image recognition-based deep learning for reading medical devices to do blood glucose readings and heart rate readings for real users that are in hospitals and hospital home maintenance programs right now. It's image recognition, but it is convolutional neural networks.
is this in hospital setting?
Most of the programs that are most involved with measuring at-home clinical values like blood glucose and blood pressure are hospital-run home care, home monitoring systems. So yeah, some of those are like Sutter Health or customers of ours in California, the big hospital chains that have these programs for their most at-risk patients. So they just point the phone at their blood pressure meter and it reads it, even though it's not Bluetooth connected.
And of course, there's a ton of money that's going into high-end athletics, like NFL teams and a variety of others, where they are monitoring and using all the information they've gained with all the millions of records to be able to say, this football player, based on the scans of his legs and everything else, could be suffering something with his knee or ligament or tendon or something else. Or there are other potential things that need to be adjusted to keep them in prime condition.
There's a company called Artemis that does MRI cardiac ventricle segmentation. It's in use in hospitals, and what they do is if you're a clinician sitting at a station and presented with a case, if you want to send that case to Artemis for review using all their thousands of cases that are in their system, you send it to them, they give you feedback on what they think. And then the way it does the learning is they either, as the clinician, like you said, they make the final call. They agree or disagree with what the machine spits back, and that's how they continuously upgrade their algorithm. And they're, I believe, one of the first FDA cleared algorithms on the market. And talking to their CEO, they do FDA submissions weekly or or every other week because they're constantly updating their algorithms.
This is why we did this. It's not just about the three of us. It's about the entire community coming together to try and discuss this and feed each other information. This is great.
So I'm going to ask the audience, do you all have any statements about AI or predictions of where you see it going? Any questions you have with one another? I feel like there's some synergy is happening as well. So I want to give everyone an opportunity to speak now or speak later. Whatever.
I have a question for you guys. From a business standpoint, all this money going into it, who's projected to make the most money off this? Is it data scientists creating algorithms? Is it vendors like the GEs, the IBMs? Is it hospitals? Is it people selling data to be analyzed? I'm just curious.
So I think AI is like a breakthrough technology platform, so it's one of those that's hard to say. It might turn into like the highway system, which just everybody uses it. So when you have like Siri or Alexa is the equivalent of like a horizontal operating system. So someone just laid all those tracks down, and now we have the opportunity to do deep dive vertical operating systems that might specialize in diagnosing cancer in your lung, and that's their thing. The underlying technology itself, I don't think is where people make money. I think it's the application of it. So it used to, I mean, there are certain like infrastructures as services that do make money, but I don't think this is necessarily one of those cases. That's just an idea. I'm not sure if that's right, but it's going to be real practical, like end use. So there's opportunity for anything that creates a significant amount of value. I think because of the training and the learning requirement that AI has to offer value, it's not going to be a one thing takes all, because they can't train everything to be smart all at one time. So I think there are going to be many winners. Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, they're saying, a lot of the people who are deep into this research are saying that AI is going to be as disruptive and transformative as internet was for businesses. A lot of people even couldn't project what the internet would do to the industries and the ways of how we live. So they're projecting AI to be that next big shift. And a question back to the panel is, how real is that? Is that hype, or are you really seeing that sort of change or hockey stick effect coming into play?
100%.
100% real.
What do you think, John?
I mean, we're already. I don't know what I can say about this. Yeah, 100%.
It's not hype. What's going to happen is it's going to go like everything from the internet, the web, to mobile. IoT is starting to have this happen now, and everything else, to where they talk about it for about 10, 15 years. You start to see implementations of it. People start finding out, wow, this really does work. It explodes, the wave crests, everybody's into it, and then it becomes ubiquitous and it becomes a part of everything. And so you're looking at it, AI is going to be able to use all this information literally to make our lives better. And again, hopefully not again with Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and all the other people that are saying it's going to kill us all. But it's going to take and improve a variety of things in our life, because it has the information to be able to make recommendations that most people, they don't have access to that information, and most people don't have the ability to process that much information. So if you were to take the idea of hype and you were to take the idea of money with what you're talking about there, and you were to try and figure out who's going to make the most money or where is this going to have the biggest impact, you have to take a look at the idea that it's at different scales as to what you're looking at. On an individual scale, if you're looking at money and such, it's going to be the data scientists. It's going to be the people that are able to create the algorithms, because every market, whether it's healthcare and even within healthcare, specifically, what are you trying to do? Is it going to be scanning images? Is it going to be making diagnoses or what have you? If it's not in healthcare, but it's also AI, are we talking about emissions from a car and how to improve that or model it or what have you? You have to have somebody who understands your industry, has the skill set and the ability to make that happen. So the data scientist as an individual is going to make the most money. In terms of the hype, who's it going to help? I would say that the first people in terms of healthcare that's going to be assisted or helped the best are those who are going to be more susceptible, because they're later in life, to disease, to other things and such, that if they can catch it ahead enough in enough time, they can keep it from progressing and getting worse and extend lifetime. In cars, autonomous driving, and everything else. Now, who's going to make the money in terms of scaling up slightly from an individual? Well, now you're going to get into the idea of small businesses and such that are going to be the first people or second or third people who paid attention, saw the mistakes of everybody else, and then built a better thing. Google wasn't the first search engine. And then they come in and they do something disruptive, and these small businesses immediately take all of this information with AI that can make these predictions, that can make all the stuff that matters and recommendations, and then they have a bunch of companies that are going to take and buy into it. So hopefully we have a lot of companies around here that are getting into that as small businesses, such as Validic, and the hope being that they all take off, do great, and then make a lot of money in that market. So again, applying AI to either A, be hidden, or to where you don't even see it, but it's doing everything, kind of like the way Target sends you coupons. Don't know if you know this. Target sends you coupons and that little booklet or what have you, or they used to. 1 or 2 coupons are actually specifically targeted to you based on data analysis and AI recommendations on your past purchasing habits and everything inside of there, but they surround it and bookend it with a bunch of useless coupons so you won't feel like you're being spied on. So there you go. It's already a part of your life. So again, small firms will make the most money to impact them, but the largest firms such as IBM with Watson and their huge push, Google and others, they are going to make probably the highest total amount because they're going to acquire the small companies that are doing well, so on and so forth. At the big thing, who's going to make the big pie of money? I think that it'll be the countries that are taking and they're pouring enough information and getting enough people interested so that they are holding on to the leaders and they are holding on to the businesses because they tax those businesses. And then they use those businesses to get more businesses and other partnerships to come in all over the entire world. So at each level, you're talking about different types of groups. And then most importantly, just like anything, once this market explodes and gets to a large enough size, the people that are going to be making a very large amount of money isn't going to be somebody who's provided an individual product or offering. It's going to be the company that's the middleman, middlewoman, middle person in between all of these who's tying together patients with maybe prosthetics and then healthcare and then maybe tying that into stuff that is within their home, and they're able to take and handle all of this information flowing between each other, and they act like that the distributor intermediary between all of them, and that's where a massive amount of money will be made.
We have a question from the couch. Let's fit in. And what about security and artificial intelligence? I mean, what is the ability that someone could go in and change some records or, you know, change the outcome? I mean, do we know anything about that? Has it happened? Will it happen?
There is the potential. That's a fascinating question, by the way. Fascinating question.
Good job, couch.
Yeah. So, from an architectural standpoint, the typical architecture of an AI system is you have a body of data, corpus, and the AI sits on top of that and does not typically write out that. Although I would say that what really makes an AI system different from machine learners, perhaps the actionable outcome. Where you can take a very smart person, but where you can potentially do some very interesting damage. If you knew what the algorithm was and knew what the points of sensitivity were, just like if you imagine like a linear system where certain variables have higher sensitivity. If you know which knob to turn on the amplifier to cause the speakers to ring in the room, AI systems could potentially be susceptible to the same kind of attack. So someone who injects legitimate but malicious data into the data set could potentially cause an offset in outcomes, which is interesting.
Have you ever watched Person of Interest?
I've not.
Okay. So it's about actually two AIs fighting each other, but they've become past the singularity super intelligent, and they're actually tweaking those knobs to do various things.
I think it takes a very intelligent person though.
Yeah,
competition right now to find those adversaries.
Yeah, and so that comes back to the value of having a closed human loop, because closed human loops really, that's going off the rails. So a closed human loop can really fairly easily detect when something goes off the rails.
I mean, anytime the models change, you should be validating against your testing anyways to ensure that it still passes.
Over here.
Yeah, I just want to somebody on the panel or elsewhere understands healthcare problem space and also has some technical insight into which AI technologies are the hot ones. So neural networks, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, adaptive filtering is one that's big for BMIs. We talked about some of these. Deep neural networks for image recognition. What are some more? What are the key ones for somebody who does these technologies?
Markov models are huge.
Sorry?
Markov models are particularly adroit at predicting, based on a series of attenuated events, what the next sequence of events will be. So Markov models become incredibly important. That's one. Because I think others.
Dynamic programming.
Yeah. You also have some of the big players in terms of languages versus individual methodologies or algorithms would be Python, Lisp, Prolog, Java. Those are the big players in the space, especially Python with all of its data analytics, Pandas, NumPy, and everything else. And so all of that is coming in, but you don't have any one single thing that's going to be able to do all of it for you. It ends up being that kind of combination. Yeah.
Algorithm.
Mathematics.
Also, decision trees and regressive decision trees are another thing that will never go away. They provide, they're not as performant as like neural networks, but they provide a business value that neural networks can't really match in a lot of respects. And it's snowflakey. You have to really kind of marry your algorithm to your problem. But decision tree regressors in particular are really great at providing fairly high performance prediction of various problems that are tractable to the human mind. And so, especially in the genesis of an AI system, where there has to be a lot of oversight, where a neural network may provide higher performance, strictly speaking, a decision tree regressor may provide a better ability to audit and then QA that AI. And so they're rudimentary, they're like one of the first kind of things out there, but I don't see them going away anytime soon.
And one thing to tie into that briefly, but maybe as a metaphor to help understand or help this make sense if you don't get it, is if you were to take the game of chess and you were to be, say, 2 moves into chess, then you go to make the very next move. Well, what's the very best move that could be made at that point in time? And it's actually the highest amount of computation and everything else is at the beginning of the chess game, because the number of moves and the number of spaces and the number of pieces are massive. So once you go 2 or 3 levels deep, you start getting into hundreds of thousands, millions, and tens of millions of possible decisions. So either A, you're going to brute force it and use an algorithm that could give you the most optimized solution, but it's absolutely brute forced and takes a very long time, or you marry and say, I'm going to have a few other things like Markov and such that are going to make recommendations so that I don't think about, well, it's a terrible idea to move this pawn because it opens up my queen to be taken by the bishop on the other side. So instead, you get rid of those because they're obviously going to be wrong, and you focus the depth of what you're trying to do down one particular tree or line.
Just a general comment about the science and math behind this AI. I wonder, with the big players like IBM and Google, their sort of technology available. So Google has their TensorFlow compute engine, right? And they put it on the cloud. And they make it available, just like they do their search, for companies to use. Does it even really matter how much you really know the math? Because as long as you know how to apply it, it becomes just like the internet, right?
I would say yes, and here's why. So first of all, TensorFlow is not going to pick your model for you or configure it for you or frame your problem for you or get your input and output data for you. And if you can't do those things, you're toast in this field. So it's a great tool. We're going to use it. But the question earlier about the math, we didn't bring up LSTMs, which are more of a time series type thing that Stephen here introduced me to, versus a convolutional neural network more suited perhaps towards arrays of data. That kind of decision, TensorFlow is not going to make that for you. And I don't, we don't look, when we're using mathematical neural networks, we don't look at the math of the model a lot, but if you don't know anything about it, there are enough parameters on the input side that you could spend a lifetime just putzing with those parameters, just trying to randomly find one that would work, instead of looking at the errors that your system is making and saying, you know what, it looks like a problem with a particular kind of parameter. I will raise that value in this configuration. You will, assuming you don't have an automation to do that for you, little hint there, you will spend a long time fiddling with your model, and someone else will beat you to market.
And that's why the data scientist is the person who's going to make the most money as an individual, because they're the ones who know how to apply the model to that industry.
So the models are old. It's really weird, but a lot of this math has been around a really long time. The guys who are making money now, and the reason we can do it now is that there's a lot more data, and there's a lot more computing power, and there's a lot more people putting it together for real business models for people who can actually make use of it. That's what really has changed. Some of the models we're using, we're reading papers from the 90s to 80s. Those models work great. They just could never make them practical and apply them to something, but now we can.
Markov was a 19th century drunk Russian.
Right. Who didn't have access to infinite computing power.
For the guy who was just speaking, do you know a use case in the healthcare space for LSTMs? Because there's no shortage of time series
data. If I was going to use an LSTM, I would use it to predict some outcome that I cared about based on a set of inputs that I had in hand. And so I'm going to make up a not entirely random example. Let's say I wanted to predict weight loss based on activity of a person measured from, I don't know, a wearable. I would possibly choose an LSTM to do that because depending on its configuration, of which there's a legion of different ways you can set those things up, but you could use the activity data, read out steps or some other complicated set of inputs representing activity, and have the output you're training to be weight gain and weight loss. And that would be a pretty straightforward application.
And one step further, there's emerging network topologies that are coming out like every other month. On top of LSTMs, there are highway networks, are the newest big thing, where the time series data is just astronomical. We're talking about years of data for one person, and how do you shut that into one network to make a prediction? So when we talk about these networks and what to choose, we're really talking about small gains in accuracy. I don't think we're really at the point where anybody's inventing a network topology that's just drastically different from something that was invented 20, 30 years ago.
Sometimes they're stacking them up. Deep learning is like stacks of networks that were invented 20 years ago, stacked up 10 years ago, and now we use them today.
Resonance are pretty new.
But for an LSTM, I didn't say the time series is what I would say is the biggest difference from like a convolutional neural network. LSTM is designed to examine the history of the data. And a convolutional neural network is like a snapshot. Like an image, what do I see?
Yeah, well, history, time.
And so something to go along with what you were talking about just a second ago about the minor efficiency improvements. As a whole, in terms of technology, web, mobile, so on and so forth, businesses used to be focused on, here's my department, I'm operations, I'm finance, I'm whatever else, distribution and everything. They focused on software to improve their areas. Well, the time is come and gone for the improvements that are going to help that single department. What companies are focused on now is how do we take and have something that can help the flow of this use case, such as making a purchase for a product, go through purchasing, finance, inventory, distribution, packaging, and shipping, all the way through those pieces and have the efficiency improved overall. And so whenever you start getting into medical, that's where AI is also going to be helping. So you're going to get these not massive, insane efficiencies out the door and, oh my goodness, it's a whole new world and all this. It's going to be a few percentages in a variety of areas that when you add all those up is a significant improvement in somebody's health.
A critical business consideration to that point is kind of what we've been talking about here, how do you have to get them the models and all this kind of stuff. One of the best bits of business wisdom that I've heard repeated multiple times in the past year or so is that you need to decide which space we're going to be in. We're talking back to who's going to make the most money. That there's a very distinct segmentation between the mathematician, the data scientist, the business applier, and the consumer, right, or / distributor. And the people who have run into folly in this have tried to do two of those. All right. So I think you really need to pick which one of those you're in and resist and I'll tell you it is a profound temptation to step outside of your box. But know enough about the proximate boxes to not fail, right? But don't step outside of your box.
You're saying don't smash the box.
Have someone else smash your box. There are people who are really good at smashing boxes. I can recommend some.
So that's interesting. You talk about staying inside your box, and you're talking about this flow through. But if you have, I'm thinking in terms of compatibility and the ability to talk to each other. I think of, as a patient comes in, they go to X-ray, maybe they have to be admitted, they have to have blood work. So you have all of these silos where you're in your box, but this patient has to flow through. How does admissions then talk to the pharmacy that talks to the lab? Where's that flow?
So those boxes, that's maybe a different interpretation of boxes. So really that's all in the application space and the end consumer space, so that's one box. Right. The service like there's Clarify.ai, right? They provide a general purpose API for the machine learner that they provide. They can be consumed by medical or whatever. They're not going to be worried about treating those patients or what they're doing. They are just making sure that their architecture and systems work and are scalable and they have a business around that. The next layer down is the data scientist who's making that happen. They don't actually care about selling it. They just want to make sure it's performant. And then the next layer down, not lowest, or the base layer of this is the mathematician who's the hypothetical. What if we looked at a model a different way or created an entirely new model? And that's far more academic. And they are certainly not worried about, you know, which nurse gets seen next. All right, so people stay in that sense their own silo.
And where AI might be able to help in something like that across different departments is, take for instance, my girlfriend, she works at UNC. She's done a lot of stuff in immunology labs, and she's also worked on a variety of Epic systems and everything else. And she told me one time that they receive a lot of calls that aren't even applicable. They've just been routed to them because a patient's looking for some information, and they've been bounced around 6 different departments. And she was the person who was kind of staff on that point, and everybody was out, so she answers the phone. They're unhappy. She can't help them. She's not exactly sure where to route them, or she can route them to the right person. Where AI could help in that area is if you were to say, this patient has come in, they have all this entire history, but here are the kind of results they're waiting in. So if they get on the phone and they talk with somebody or what have you to validate information or get through that kind of like secure PII, PHI, whatever, validate who they are, then it could route them to an appropriate department to work with. Each department's going to have its inputs and outputs that determine what they care about and what matters to them and what categorizes them. And if you can take and build a system that's on top of that, that can then say, here's the categories, here's the different areas, and based on my understanding of this person's medical records, I can put them here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just to say, so I used to be an investor in the AI space, and a lot of times what we would look at was data as the scarce resource. So talking about where the value lies, ultimately, investors are looking at this at a data perspective. So where does your algorithm add new information? And you see a huge surge in things like chatbots that are coming out because they gather a ton of new information. And investors are incredibly excited about that because you can't just put another algorithm out there. At least the talk in the space with investors that I've had has been that the algorithm will become the commodity and that the data itself is where the value lies.
Well, I can follow that up and say, when we want to do something with the data we have, we just download an algorithm. We literally, the libraries are a million free libraries that have the algorithms for different networks in them, for example. That's not holding it back. It's the data and where to bring that to bear.
And this is why Facebook is free. This is why Google, Inbox, and all their services they're offering are free, because what they are getting is the most valuable thing in this current universe and world is data about you, what you're doing, what you care about, so that they can use that to either make recommendations to sell things to you in Google's thing and Facebook, or in case of healthcare, having more of this information so they can make better recommendations to help you. So yes, data is absolutely the most important piece.
So, based on all of this, like you're saying, especially if you were at Duke, you know this, all of the data, even in a hospital like Duke, that's utterly state of the art, is a node, right? Like maybe you know patient demographics, but you don't know symptoms, you don't know the results of, you know, the scan that was performed. All those things they're virtually dictated. I mean, they're just notes in a file. So is there anything going on now that's working on pulling discrete data out of those notes? Are there any companies going to look at historical data and make it available to AI? Because right now, you're basically, you could create the best AI in the world, and there's no data for it to look at.
Yes. I'm trying to be very careful because, you know, everybody has NDAs. We're recording this in video, but suffice it to say, there are a number of startups and other businesses that are investigating not only transcribing audio and associating that with image files and everything else, but also taking actual written notes, and I'm not talking OCR technology, let's assume it's already been converted, and saying, the doctor said all of this, which doesn't mean a damn thing to anybody, and convert that into something that would make sense, and depending on the severity of it, tie emotional stuff to it. So yes, there are a number of startups and research going on in that space to bring that out.
I'm not under NDA, so I'll say health fidelity, nuance, and modal. number of others.
And all that said, though, I think the general consensus among AI data scientists is that area that you're describing is called natural language processing. Natural language processing is like the last uncracked frontier, and it is a matter of religious argument. Like people scream at each other over beers over whether this is a tractable problem.
It's very helpful if you can narrow the problem space for
Yeah.
NLP, and that's why there's hope for very specific applications. We really focus on a narrow set of.
So that was my next question. Is like who's the decision maker? Like if you're doing NLP looking at one tiny little sect of medical data, somebody has to define the data points that you're collecting, and that's going to be incredibly hard. And that's going to be a massive panel of industry leaders to do that, to all agree that this is what you collect, what you would collect. I'd assume you sort of.
As with anything else, it's not going to happen by one company. It's not going to happen by one entire system. It's going to be a collection of different systems that are doing different aspects of this. And then somebody, again, the middle person I was talking about, somebody's going to create something that will then pull those recommendations out, aggregate at a higher level, and pass on that information on to somewhere else. So like I mentioned earlier about my background, I actually worked for a startup that specialized in doing NLP, and I was working with the data scientist on writing stuff out to work on Hadoop and Cassandra and other stuff like that to be able to take and make these recommendations. And it was amazing because you could get a whole lot out of a page in a book, you could get a lot out of a blog post, you could get quite a bit out of a forum post, but oh man, you want to try to find out what somebody means by a single Twitter? Whenever they say, this is bad, is that good or bad? What is the context of it and what does it mean and everything else? So again, it depends on the context of the information being provided, the size of the information, and how much you have. So going back exactly to what you were saying, you're going to have to aggregate not all of them together and process. You're going to have something that's handling and doing stuff here, and then you're surfacing those results to be handled at a higher level through that workflow.
I think.
Have you met Dr. John?
I think two things are being left out of the discussion here that I'll try to bring to bear. One is like why we're using AI. So for what purpose are we using AI? This is all cool. I'm learning a lot from this, but what I'm not hearing is the why. And two things go into the why. One is the uses for it. So 5 things matter in healthcare: patient outcomes, lowered costs, you have improved provider satisfaction, less burnout, and patient experience. The 5th thing would be integration, I would say. That's sort of not part of the quadruple aim, but none of this will work unless you integrate with the system that currently exists. No health system is going to upend their system for your AI.
And scalability.
Yep.
So,
well, sort of. I think health systems are very provincial right now, and so that scalability is not, no health system cares about scalability beyond their enterprise. The thing underlying all of that is the payment system. So doctors get paid by what they do, not the result they get. So AI promises to yield lowered costs for great results. But doctors don't want to change their habits if AI is cutting out their activity, because their activity is what pays them. So none of this will really take off until payment reform happens. I'm working on that right now. I think it's exciting. There are some model examples. Complete joint replacement in orthopedics is one. It's been going on, funded by the CMS for the last 14 months. And it pays $30,000 to a facility to take care of a right knee replacement for 90 days. And the facility and the doctors and the team and everyone involved, you got the inpatient surgical admission, you have the post-op for a couple of days in the hospital, you go home or you go to acute care. All of that has to be paid for in under $30,000 or you run out of business eventually. Once things like that happen, then AI will step in and it will remove the personnel costs, it will improve the outcomes, it will enable physicians and healthcare providers to reach patients where they are and they don't have to be physically in person. They can use chatbots. That's where success will happen. I will predict not until then will AI take off meaningfully in healthcare. It'll be fun, flashbang, cool, but until payment reform happens and until AI clearly satisfies outcomes, costs, experience, and satisfaction, then I'm bearish on AI, I guess, in healthcare.
Readmission is another area where the costs have been shifted because the federal reimbursement for patients who get readmitted too soon really hurts hospitals' bottom line. So if predictive systems can help avoid readmission, I think that's a point where effectively what you're talking about, the payment model has already been changing and has opened the door to outcome-based tools, which AI is an outcome-based tool. So.
Yeah. So.
I will just add here, I think it's notable that many of the health systems that are experimenting with AI have a very close relationship with the payer. They either own a payer, UPMC is doing this, Intermountain is doing this, St. Mary's is doing this. They're all health systems that own a payer. UNC doesn't own a payer, but it's the state health system has very strong ties to the state government's payment system. So there is a financial incentive in place, and as CMS kind of ratchets up the pressure on everybody to do the bundled payments and joint replacements are a great example. They're doing the same thing with heart failure likely next year. As that becomes the norm, that's going to increase the natural interest in AI.
Yeah, question back here.
Yeah, two questions. One, I'm just curious. Salesforce just came out with Einstein, where they actually help salespeople actually input data into Salesforce. I would think it would be great for doctors who don't have to input into electronic records. That would be a great customer satisfaction score improvement. So I was wondering how the AI that Salesforce uses for Einstein, how come it couldn't be used with the interaction with electronic health records? And then the second question is, how does blockchain enter all this conversation? Is that even with all the connectivity and IoT, and even with the reimbursement and doctors getting paid and everything, how does blockchain enter the conversation as far as interoperability, which is like really key big problem in health?
That's a great question. That's all the time we have tonight.
I can answer that fast if you want. There's no reason. Answer one. And blockchain, all blockchain does is prove originality. So it's a little bit tangential to AI itself. So if you need to, for whatever reason, confirm for the purpose of the AI that this document is original, that a birth record is the legit birth record, and this is not some foreign agency trying to spoof some passport for a foreign agent, then blockchain becomes very relevant for that kind of thing. But it's just from the perspective of AI, it's just another data set.
So I was thinking about the time, kind of, but I know this gentleman had a question, and then I have one for everyone.
So I'm definitely in over my head that this is a fascinating conversation. I'm more interested in customer engagement, customer empowerment, and I wonder how genomic research and having those data sets are going to impact the use of AI, or how those start to work together.
I was just reading an article earlier today that was talking about genomic research and specifically utilizing AI to either make recommendations. I mean, we've all heard of 23andMe and everything else, and now we're all starting to hear about, ooh, how accurate is it really? And so trying to use AI and all of the different things to be able to make those recommendations, there is a ton of research, and I know that sounds like a cop-out, but there is a ton of research going into it active right now, and if I can get your name later, I'll get that article to you, that is talking about applying AI to that to find out, we have the patient, we have their medical records, we have this information, and we can utilize their genomic information also to find out what are they predisposed to or potentially susceptible to.
We can definitely post that link in the Meetup page.
Genomics, no doubt, will have a huge impact, right? It already does. The BRCA gene, HER2 receptors, all these things are well known, but they're well known and you can do something about them. So they're well known and they have a treatment. And that's key. You can get all this stuff and you can be diagnosed with these consumer, go to Walgreens to get your tests done for whatever, for $125, but then what do you do with that? There's nothing.
Or they sell it to the insurance companies.
Yeah. So genomics will bear fruit only when you can act upon that data. And I think that's similar for all the discussion we've had.
Yes.
So I've listened carefully, and I'm quasi-associated with big data. I'm not a data scientist, I'm an engineer. I apply algorithms. I think the focus tonight has been primarily on the decisions and AI affecting decision making. And I wonder if there was a whole other topic that got missed, because this is HealthTech2027, where you envision not today's AI, but the AI of 2027, when these intelligences in detached devices, the IoT, the Internet of Things, will actually be interacting with humans. And you didn't talk anything about computer-human interaction and how intelligent that's going to be in the future, and how tuned it will be to personalities, and in situ, it will be situational. The computers are going to react much like humans do today. Is that a topic that's even being talked about in the healthcare industry, or in the big data people who are developing algorithms?
So when you're talking about interfacing with people, and even in 10 years from now, we're still a very long ways away. Once you get past, trying to pass the Turing test or what have you, you're still going to have, after that initial interaction, it's going to start kind of falling apart. And that's the big barrier between it feeling like you're interacting with a person. But this was also getting to what I was talking about earlier about preventative medicine. The only way that's going to work through AI to be able to keep people out of the hospital and keep the insurance companies from paying a ton of money is to be able to make those recommendations. But you can't make those recommendations unless you can interact with the person. So right now, around 10, 11 years ago, when mobile phones and smartphones started getting big, we didn't really envision all the apps and everything that was going to happen today, but the idea was that this would be something that's a part of us. Lo and behold, people don't have landlines anymore. I haven't had a landline since 2006. I've just had a cell phone. So with AI, it's going to become ubiquitous like this, and what it's going to do is not like an individual that you're talking to in terms of this is Sally. It's going to be something that speaks up and says, hey, it's time for you to take your medication, or it's time for you to do this. It'll react both maybe your car giving that notification as well as the phone. Maybe there will be a Fitbit or some other kind of wearable that you're going to have, or depending on what mental potential issues or health issues you might have, it might be making recommendations to a family member to assist in carrying you. So in
ubiquitous computing, basically, you'll have a computing device around you all the time, and if the healthcare professional wants to, they can interact with that device to get more insight into what's going on.
Exactly.
I like that.
They just had this guy Corbett, does the Corbett report. They just talked about this device app in Canada where it's constantly interacting with its user on the smartphone and telling it to do different things to get points.
Mm-hmm.
And you collect the points, and then you get like a little report.
Yeah. It's like Pavlov's dogs. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting maybe form factor for this group one time after we've met a few times, is to try to have a pitch night where you cast your vision of what's possible in 10 years, where you can really remove a lot of the things that Dr. John brought up, which are today's realities of challenges to acceptance. And once you release yourself of all the burdens, maybe come up with some breakthrough ideas. So that's a great idea. Thank you.
The care model is going to change within 10 years. Do you think the reimbursements are going to be?
I do. No, I do. I actually do, and I think that's because doctors actually care about this. They're all burned out, and they don't want to practice the way they're currently practicing. Patients want better outcomes. They don't just want things done to them. So this is all coming to a head, and just like we've talked about with AI, there's the capacity to now support this kind of thinking. And I think there's a phrase that always sticks out in my head as I try to think about the career that I hope unfolds for me, which is you always overestimate what happens in 1 year and underestimate what happens in 10 years. 10 years ago, the iPhone was introduced, and the world has changed. And not that healthcare will have some kind of device that changes healthcare, but payment reform is happening. Private insurers are on board with this. CMS is on board with this. And with the tools to be able to track cost, outcomes, provider experience, provider satisfaction, and patient experience, once we can track those things, then we can build around and benchmark against and improve against those measures. And that capacity exists, and it's up to smart people to put it together in a reasonable way. You need a little bit of time. As in healthcare, you have to prove safety and efficacy. You need 2 to 5 years to prove out a model, prove that it cuts costs, bring it to CMS, bring it to Blue Cross. They're going to support it if you've proven it. That can all happen in 10 years, absolutely.
It's a big shift to turn.
Yeah, it is a big ship to turn, but otherwise we're going to go broke. So we're sinking. Yeah, turn the wheel. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think so? Do you think it'll change? You don't think so? Okay.
I mean, like HIPAA started in '96. Has it gotten any better? It's gotten so much worse. Like my career started in healthcare tech, dealing with VHI in 1997, and 20 years later, it is exponentially worse than it's ever been, and I don't see any change in that coming.
Why is it exponentially worse?
I mean, I made a career, like the idea that you could have data outside of the hospital, that's my entire career, and it's only gotten harder. Every single year it's gotten harder. Like my ability, like you said, my ability to go build a piece of software for even a small regional hospital, like I have to have a team of lawyers on staff to make that happen. I have to carry cyber insurance, over $10 million. It's ludicrous. And I could be handling a small team that, maybe they have 6 patients a week. I still have to carry it. So I think it's very optimistic. I hope you're right, but I think so many things have to change for it to get any better that I think 10 years is very optimistic.
I think people respond to incentives, and so I agree. I think there's more data since 1996, right? It's all discrete and stored somewhere. That probably makes it harder, but doctors respond more than anything to getting paid and to improving patients' lives, right? But if you're going to run a business if you don't get paid too. So what fundamentally is going to happen is the payment models are going to change, and then the policies are going to follow. And then, we're going to start figuring out that we don't need 1 million data points. We just need 6 to help with this patient. Then the data shrinks. It becomes more meaningful. It becomes information, not just data. And once one institution or one team proves something, healthcare has this legacy of everyone follows afterwards. It's not like someone has to recreate it over here, you have to pass it over there. Just like drug trials. You prove one drug's better than another, everyone falls in line. It takes maybe 10 to 20 years for the people to fall in line behind drugs, but if the government is not paying you, Blue Cross Blue Shield's not paying you, you're going to change your behavior tomorrow. And that's what's going to happen. So I think it's up to a dyad, it's up to a clinician, and it's up to an analyst of some sort to work together, to feed each other, and to prove that meaningful relationship. And I think we're just beginning to understand how to work together as clinicians and as analytic folks, and that's going to become more comfortable over time, and I'm optimistic that good stuff's going to come from that.
And to help with the other issue that you're talking about there with HIPAA, PHI, PII, and all that other such, a lot of companies now, as they move towards these SaaS platforms and everything, they're wanting to break into medical because of just the sheer piece of pie and money that's available there. So you're getting more and more businesses, whether it's file storage, systems, servers, space, cloud, what have you, that are calling themselves and taking on the risk and burden of being HIPAA compliant. And so while you may have to end up getting a lawyer or somebody else to do that, whereas in the past you would have had to handle everything by yourself, you can now spread that risk around by partnering or working with other companies that are taking care of this portion of it for you, this, and this, allowing you to focus specifically on what you're trying to develop.
That's a good example, but just yesterday, we're putting something, we use that, we have a VAA in place with them, our back end. The hospital I was trying to put a contract together with asked for my SOC2 risk assessment report.
Yep.
Right? And we have all of our HIPAA ducks in a row. I'd never heard of it. I looked it up on Azure. Of course they have one. I sent it to them. They said, no, we need yours. And if you can't provide it, we can't, do business with you. So it's just this ever-changing, ever-evolving thing. I'm going to have to go through, 6 months to get this thing generated, if I can even get it generated.
And so there's you a new company. Form a startup that goes around helping tech startups do the whole HIPAA compliance and charge them a goodly amount of money for it. Yeah.
But it's like, it seems like every time you think, all right, I've got the whole thing figured out now,
yeah.
No matter how big we get, there's one more thing that's going to get you. And I'm waiting to crest and come down the other side. So I hope you're right. I really, really want to see that happen, but it just seems like the mountain keeps getting taller.
AI for HIPAA compliance.
An AI lawyer for HIPAA compliance.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm in the clinical informatics program here at Duke School of Medicine, and I couldn't agree more with Dr. O'Donnell here. I think the payment reform needs to take place before healthcare really starts to care about this. And I'm not sure what the conversation was like, back when HIPAA was, initially made and really grabbing hold. But people care nowadays, and there's a lot of policymakers, there's a lot of CIOs and different healthcare executives who really do care about this, and I would assume more than what the conversation was like many years ago. So in 10 years, I do think there will be change. I think there's a lot of momentum right now. And another thing that I would add, completely tangent from that, is I think there's a lot of opportunity for AI in patient matching to the appropriate services and community resources. And I think that will significantly reduce readmissions. And I think there's a lot of cost savings there and a lot of opportunity there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think on that topic, just the determinants of health, Forecast Health. You work for Forecast Health? Oh, okay. So Forecast Health is one. So there are numerous studies done of what determines a clinical outcome. 10% of it is healthcare. 20% of it is genetics. Say 30% of it is kind of your environment, and the balance is behavior. So I'm always struck by a lot of the I think as humans, we like to talk about things we know and we know we can kind of master. Like AI, we're gonna master AI. That's gonna be fun. But mastering how to corral human behavior is not something people talk about. But it's the largest determinant of health. And then you couple that with communities and the ecosystem, the environment they grow up, their upbringing, just the poverty level, et cetera. Can we apply AI to those things? Yes, we can, but it's a hard conversation to have because it's so hard to quantify.
Some of the points earlier about it being like on your person, like a cell phone, as we default to decision heuristics, we want to make really easy choices. We humans are not super smart, so we default to what our parents used and what's familiar to us, and the compromise effect and all these other decision heuristics. So it's on your person the same way a cell phone, you just pick it up whenever you hear it goes off. Maybe we change our behavior because we just get so used to doing what it tells us to do.
It's possible.
So if I could add to your social determinants of health, I do not work for Forecast Health, but I had a very enlightening discussion with their founders. So they did a project with UNC, and it was around population health, really about matching patients to most appropriate service, intervening when they're likely to readmit, very traditional population health stuff. Forecast Health used machine learning to basically pour over all of UNC's data set. They got access to the data warehouse effectively in a secure environment. Some of the most powerful predictors that they found in the medical database, this is largely coming out of Epic and other kind of hospital systems, were really proxies for social determinants of health things. It's things like, does the patient show up to appointments reliably? And it's not that behavior necessarily was the thing that caused them to have bad outcome. It's reflective of, do they have transportation? Do they have family support? Can they self-manage? Social determinants of health stuff. So I think one of the most interesting things about machine learning in particular is it can find the signal in the very, in the big mountain of data, the very noisy data, and it can pull out the predictors that a human analyst wouldn't necessarily have thought of. Do they show up on time for appointments?
But I think it's interesting that it's whittled down to something that's so obvious. We don't need a machine to tell us that, like
it's something way more profound at the same time.
Yeah.
That only these problems that afflict healthcare currently will never be solved until we implement AI, which makes me very excited about it. The reason why is that human beings, I'm using the word chaos in the mathematical sense of the word chaos. Human beings are chaotic. The behavior is chaotic, and the things that will change health behaviors are chaotic. Some Jenny McCarthy deciding that vaccines are bad, right? Some little butterfly flaps its wings and bad things happen in this case. But the neat thing about AI is that it can respond, it can watch what's going on in the space in very much real time, and then respond to that in real time, and then modify its predictors in real time, so that, to your point, the the interventions and the health systems we put in place are more responsive than a human-driven system could be. So that's a fascinating future, I think, that we have to look forward to. It's going to be, I think it's awesome.
And you can take everything that you're talking about with social determinants, or societal determinants, and what you're talking about there, and then you can affect one of the, in my personal opinion, one of the biggest factors in somebody's life is habit. Influencing their habit, either reworking and guiding them from bad habits into good habits and helping them through that steps, and having an AI that can both see, are they changing their habit? What is their past information? What would be good habits for this particular person? And utilizing the phone to either speak up or vibrate, or if you have in time clothing that's got IoT, or maybe even your Nest at home or something else, or even your fridge, you open it up and it's like, or what have you. But helping at every single tiny little bit of level to help influence and change a person's habit for the better. And we love habit as a society because that's what advertisements and everything. I mean, we have a rich amount of data and research around habit because that's what marketing and advertisers use to get you to buy their stuff. So let's use that, combine that with everything that you're saying here with societal determinants and all of that to help guide people with habits, and AI can massively influence that.
Humans being chaotic, they're emotionally driven and biochemically motivated. And so I think in line with an earlier topic, the idea of IoT and attached devices tracking your personal biochemical metrics, I think that's going to be a large space moving forward in terms of altering behavior or altering habits or allowing somebody to take control over their biochemical motivation.
This may sound a little far-fetched, but I'm coming from a scientific background. We already have more data, I think, than we have time for human beings to analytically solve, ever. Just ever. We have that down. So either we don't use it, or we get machine learning to help us. Sure, we don't stop pursuing analytical models that have real mathematical solutions to things. We don't stop doing that, or my dad would be out of a job. But they'll never get to it all. They'll get to a tiny fraction of that. So if we want to use the data that we have, I think we just have to use machine learning to come to grips with it.
And there's two things, which is neat. To this gentleman back here's point, we talked thus far about, well, what do you impact once you've analyzed the data and then you have an impact? But there's another thing that AI does extraordinarily well. If anyone has a business that they're thinking of wrapping around AI, there's really two ways of doing things. You need schools. One school is you do things after the fact, after you analyze the data and make determine outcomes from that. The other one is based on social patterns. You can actually clean your data very much like an EKG cleans the noise and makes a nice, smooth, QRST. You can make sure that the data coming in is cleaner, and actually by reducing the noise, make to your point, the data that we're evaluating far more trackable by cutting out the non-pertinent data. So AI is useful at both the front end and the back end of that decision.
So at this point, want to offer the crowd either we can break, and those who need to trickle out, you're more than welcome to. Those who want to replenish on food, you can, and then we can rejoin, or we can wrap up with some additional last-minute questions. Panel can also probably think about where they see AI, in the next 10 years, or where they want to see it, or what are some of the, distractors that can happen with it. So just opening it up to everybody, kind of where you want to go, because I feel like the conversation's going.
I'd say let's wrap up the panel, finish food and drinks, which are also AI would tell you is not good for you, pizza and beer. Whoops, we haven't run that model yet.
I think we have one from the couch. The couch makes another.
Go ahead.
So I just have a quick question. So we see, I'm kind of curious if we're expecting to see healthcare kind of spearhead the movement into AI, since healthcare is an industry that's shown to kind of lag behind in technology. And I mean, understandably so, because I mean, most industries are in actual life or death situations, but in the case of healthcare, you are. them being the pioneers into applying AI technology as it develops? Or, I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
I think I know what Dr. John would say.
I don't think so.
No.
No.
Yeah. But why can't it have the most profound effect, though? And so it's maybe one of the more important and significant industries to embrace technology.
I've been listening, and I have 4 generations of doctors in my family, in my extended family, and they all talk about the fact that patients become more rebellious. And I mean, I have one doctor, great uncle, who was practicing in the 1920s, and he had very little to offer, but people would take his advice. And now we have so much technology and knowledge, and my cousin says no one listens to him. And so the outcomes are sometimes really poor. And then the other thing I'm thinking in terms of is that in the United States specifically, we have a lot more tribes than they have in, say, Japan. And partially because there are so many tribes, and then there's such rebelliousness in the individual tribes. How does having the knowledge from AI still help us help ourselves be healthy?
I think it makes it transparent. So I think right now healthcare is incomprehensible and not well understood. And there's a movement within healthcare that's very minimal right now, but gaining steam about transparency for cost. If I go to the doctor, I need to know how much this is going to cost. Cost is one important part of healthcare that also could benefit from AI. But then, being able to track and prove that something is better and making that data available to the patient in a consumable fashion and not buried in a JAMA article, then that will allow a dialogue to happen and enable shared decision making, which is the ultimate goal here, where the doctor is not the dictator and is not a pushover, but is somehow an advisor. And that is similar to a role that your great uncle in the 1920s played, where that patient said, "Doc, I just want to be able to till my farm. What can I do to till my farm?" And the doc would say, put some leeches on you. And that mattered. But right now we're caught in this realm of I need to lower your blood pressure by 5 points, independent of whether that helps you do anything else in life. So these outcomes that are being defined and being implemented and being tracked are going to be patient-reported outcomes and meaningful outcomes, outcomes of function and not necessarily of value, of quantitative value. And the ability to quantify these, display them, digest them, and talk about them will be the cure to this Dr. Google fad, because that's what's digestible. I can go to Google and I can actually understand what's being told to me, even if it's scary and wrong. But the doctor spends 2 minutes with me and I don't understand anything he says, so I'm just going to go with Dr. Google.
Sometimes the doctors Google the thing anyway and show you the search results.
So one thing that goes along with what you're saying, and this is what we try to do with some of our different applications that we develop, is find out how can you best interact with the end user who you're not going to be holding their hand, but you're wanting to make recommendations and guide them through this flow. So as you're talking about with your family history, and as Dr. John here is talking about, you can have the doctor make the recommendation. They are the ones who are making the decision. Based on their decision and the other information that the system has about the patient, you can then carry on and throughout the day that AI, through the various devices and such, can help reinforce that decision with that person in a way that they can understand what they're saying, because you have all these things that are helping break this down into digestible sound bites versus the doctor who's trying to pump as much information as they can as possible into that individual in a short time.
Even more than just digestible, understandable chunks, like people learn in different ways, they're motivated by different things, like identifying what motivates somebody on a personal level is something that AI could actually probably tackle pretty well.
Like if I got rewarded with ice cream.
Yes.
Yeah. That's my thing. That's my motivation.
Digital relationships with health portals. Are they coming back again? Like I'm with WakeMed, and now I can have these digital conversations with my doctor, where he posts the blood results and have these conversations. He says, "Hey, I'll get back with you through that portal." So I'm wondering, is the AI going to benefit that kind of mechanism, and is it going to be expanded as well? What do you guys think about that?
Chatbots. Chatbots will take that over. Yeah. Right now, doctors don't get paid for answering calls, emails, in-basket messages, any of that. So they hate doing that. But when the model changes and you're paid a flat fee regardless, and it turns out that me actually interacting with you outside of my office keeps you out of healthcare and helps you be well, then I'm going to start doing that more and do less of the in-person stuff. And then once you realize that I don't need to be doing that, a chatbot can answer these questions, and that frees me up to actually use my my MD for real medical decision-making power. Then chatbots will slide in, answer those scheduling questions. I got the wrong prescription. I have itching. So that will slide in very nicely. I think a good article that I posted on the Meetup is AI versus MD. It's a New Yorker article. So for those of you who have read it, it's interesting. For those of you who haven't read it, I recommend it.
So at this time, I think what we're going to do is bring this discussion to an end. However, there's still networking to do. Just a note, and again, all of this information will be posted in the Meetup. We will have another one September 12th. That's a Tuesday. No game going on, no DPAC event. Sorry about that. No, but we really appreciate everyone's input. We will also have a survey going out. So if you would like to be on the panel next time, or even the moderator, we would love to hear from you. Give us your feedback. What would you like to talk about next time? We're opening this up to everybody. Again, our goal is to really kind of like push the boundaries, smash the box. I had to put that in there. Take the conversations further. But again, thank you all for making it out here. I know it wasn't easy, but it was a great discussion. Feel free to post any links in the Meetup page, but feel free to stick around and network some more. Panel.